There we go. Well, hello. Today we got a follow-up conversation with Dr. Tavo about his video. I had some comments. I made a follow-up video. All that stuff is going to be linked in the description. But conversation is going to revolve around Richard Carrier's book on the historicity and our conversations and videos. Seems like I made the last kind of comment or by making my video, and so yeah, I want to kind of give it to you to have any follow-up questions or comments in regards to the video that I made, and then we can just kind of go back from there from
No,
then.
no, I don't really have any comments. I thought it was a great video. I thought you made a lot of points that were really valid.
Oh,
If I could change anything in my video, I would probably maybe soften my tone a little bit about Richard's work. I mean, I think in some ways I was being maybe a little bit too reactionary to some of the negative comments that I've gotten on my channel since I've started my channel, or some negative comments that people came at me with on Reddit. I guess I just think maybe I should have softened my perspective on Carrier. I will say one of the things I liked in your video, especially, was you started right off the bat and you said, let's not make this a theological discussion. If you want to be Christian, be Christian. This is about whether or not Jesus was historical or mythical. That doesn't have to mean that you don't believe in God. That doesn't mean that you have to not believe in Jesus. I actually feel very much the same.
um,
You,
go ahead.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, cool. Wasn't sure where the conversation was going to go, but it's cool that it. Yeah, I agree. Sorry. Yeah, I wasn't expecting this kind of a response. So, um,
No, no, no. I mean, like for instance, like Richard Miller, who is well, maybe you should bleep out his name because I don't want to identify him too much personally, but I guess it doesn't matter that much. But
I,
anyways, he's writing the blurb or the testimonial for the back cover of Carrier's next book,
mhm.
right? And he kind of came at me with like almost all of his comments, and he had a long comment thread on my video that was basically like his whole analysis was that I'm a religious nut job. And so I think one of the things that I wanted to start with is I don't actually have any religious conviction that is, so I don't actually have a personal theological stake on Carrier's work. I
Mhm.
think even if I did, I would just disclose like that's my bias, but I don't think that invalidates somebody from having an opinion necessarily. So I was like, so when people were like saying, "Oh, you're a religious nut job," I was like, actually, I first of all, I think it's okay to express an opinion, right? Even if you have a religious bias, you should just say, this is what my bias is. And I think more people should do that. Just say like, here, I'm wearing my hat as an academician and I conclude this. I'm wearing my hat personally as a believer. This is what I conclude. But my personal theology is not impacted at all by whether or not you approve or reject Carrier's thesis. In other words, let's say we found archaeologically a genuine letter from Peter, and Peter said, just so everyone is clear, Peter said this in his letter, just so everyone is clear, none of these stories are with us physically interacting with somebody named Jesus. This was like an angel who came down and interacted with us. And I just want to get that, make that really clear, just in case, Tavo or Op4 misinterprets what we're saying in the New Testament 2,000 years from now. That actually wouldn't change my theology really that much. So even if Carrier is proven to be right by some archaeological find, which is not totally outside the realm of possibility, I think I would still not, I would still say that, the theological impact to my life would probably be minimal.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, and I support that kind of stuff, and that's why I kind of have the conversation in the way that I do. I don't know. I mentioned somewhere that I have all these conversations with personal friends of mine who are Christian. I don't know how it came to pass, but pretty much everyone that are close friends to mine are heavy religious people. And so if I'm ever talking about this kind of stuff, I'm doing it in a very like empathetic way that like is, yeah, I definitely seen a lot of your comments, and there is a lot of crazy people that were going really hard on stuff, and I kind of felt like that was how you were coming at me, and with your comments initially on the video, you're like, oh, you just felt like you're kind of telling me I just sounded like the average carrier nut job, I guess. Um, but yeah, no. So anyway, yeah, I kind of got off on a tangent there, but I think it's really cool to think about how, as a Christian, even though I'm not a Christian, like how this or any of these things could change, whether it matters. Um, you know, James Tabor um, is a guy I listen to a lot, and
Sure,
I
yeah, yeah, yeah. James Tabor, yeah.
he's recently kind of, I guess, made a religion, or not a religion, but he's kind of a scholar that's adding this new, taking all the lenses that you get from all these critical scholarship and like using it in a kind of spiritual way. And I think that's really really interesting. And I've thought about, how would someone do that with, Richard's work? Um, could you incorporate this kind of stuff, or how would that look? And interesting. But anyway, um, okay, well, interesting. I
Well, let's jump right into some specific claims the carrier makes though, because
Yeah, yeah,
I
sure.
don't want to gloss out. And by the way, like broadly, I would agree with the call for skepticism. I just when I read Carrier's work, I was like, this is flawed methodology. And you can
Hmm.
maybe illuminate me if there's some things that Carrier describes better. But let's talk about okay, so I have a list, so
Yeah,
I apologize if I just let's go through some of these.
let's go.
So all right, let's number one. Carrier says that Jesus was born of a woman. Now, I understand I'm sorry, Paul says that
Yeah,
Jesus was born of a woman. Now, I understand that Carrier interprets this to be metaphorical, symbolic, a celestial event. But how do you reconcile this claim? And I just want to say, like, I didn't go. This was actually part of the video that I put out, and then I took it out because it was just too time consuming. But to me, if you even say to somebody nowadays, what this person's born of a woman, what does that mean to you? They're going to say, okay, so I'm dealing with a real human being, somebody who's born of a woman, and that's the idiom that people will, the meaning of that idiom that people will interpret. Moreover, born of a woman shows up about 6 times in the Old Testament to mean, a human mortal being. And moreover, it actually shows up all over the Hellenistic literature. I found about 6 different statements where people said born of a woman, and where they're specifically delineating, okay, that is a mortal entity, that's a human being, it's a human existence. So I mean I've read through Carrier's refutation on that,
right.
but isn't
So
that
what?
a
So
little
what
hard?
would it? So what would Carrier say? Like I'll answer, but I so well yeah, I'll ask you first. What do you think Carrier's answer to that would be?
Yeah, so I looked that up in the book. It seems like even some of Carrier's defenders agree that that's a gap in his analysis. So Carrier makes the point that this is a symbolic or metaphorical or celestial sort of birth from a woman, and he goes into the analysis of the female presence, the female counterpart of God or the deity. But I mean, even Richard Miller, who's writing the testimonial for Carrier's next book, admitted that that's a gap. And if you are Paul and you're writing that and you say born of a woman, it seems to me like you are going to be aware that that is a statement that if you mean it in a celestial, metaphorical, or symbolic sense, right away people are going to misinterpret that. So it
So
seems like Paul would have said born of a woman, by which I mean in a celestial sense, he wasn't physically born of a woman. So it just seems like why would Paul use an idiom that is well known in the Old Testament, that would be well known to Pharisees, that Paul himself must have known? Like why would he purposefully sow confusion in a way that seems so purposeful?
well, I think it feels like you're reading into it like that he would need to be sowing confusion. But so if I'm remembering correctly, and I don't have the book out right now, but um, you can be born celestially. Like this is my question to you is why wouldn't he say Mary?
Um, I don't know.
Like he
Does Paul does
specifically says born of a woman in a very kind of um, yeah, you know what I mean? Like this there also, I'll say that within his there are certain things within Paul and throughout all of this adds in his equation to historicity. In other words, like I'm not sure on this specific case, but some things actually, you know what I'm saying? He doesn't discount them all, but so not all of the things he's like saying. I'm not sure if I'm making sense. He looks through all the evidence, and that is the lens and through which it could be viewed as a mythicist or minimal mythicist. So yeah, I don't know that if that doesn't make sense, that's fine. I mean, but through the lens of it doesn't say Mary, it doesn't have someone's name, and we also have, I'm pretty sure in the book it goes through different celestial beings having births and stuff, and this is like a normal thing. If you're born, that's partially what even Paul is like. So he's a celestial being, but he's also human. So humans get born of women. So if it is a celestial, if he is a human and it's a celestial event, he still has to be born of a woman. But it is interestingly missing the Mary or anything that would actually tie it
Well,
other than
I
a
can,
woman to Earth.
yeah, I can actually emphasize why he doesn't say born of Mary. There's two reasons. Number one is he's using an idiom. He's using precisely the same phraseology that gets used in the book of Job in the Old Testament, where he says born. The book of Job refers to the mortal condition as born of a woman. So all those who are born of a woman. So
Correct.
and so
And so
that's
he is human. He is human, but at least the idea is that he's a celestial human, and there are other celestial humans. Um, you know, uh, yeah, I don't, or things that happen in the realms of the spheres that go through. Um, yeah, I don't know.
well. I see what you're saying, but I guess there is another reason why Paul might not mention Mary specifically, by the way, which is just the overall, and I've talked about this in a lot of my videos, the overall denigrated way the women are treated, especially in first century antiquity Jewish literature. In fact, the Talmud says, "Better the words of the Lord be burned than delivered to the ears of a woman." So I don't know that Paul is specifically directly going to be super respectful of Mary. But this is interesting because so what you're
Uh,
saying is Jesus could have had a human form and been a celestial entity. So he would have looked to everyone around him like human. He would have been born through a womb. I guess my question is then, is that still something that you could even really call mythicism? Because it sounds like to me you're adopting what I agree with, which is a hybrid perspective.
well,
And
kind,
by which
kind,
I'm
or go ahead.
oh no, I think there's more
There.
explanatory.
Sorry. There's a couple
That's
things
fine.
I wanted to jump in there on.
Okay,
Um,
go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
and I'm going to forget all of them by the time I'm done. Well, one to go back, and this isn't going to have anything to do, but it seems to me that Paul has a good view of women, and that he's able, like the parts on Paul that he says like women can't talk in church. I think were added later. Are you familiar with the this line of thought at all, or should I go down that?
Yeah, the genuine versus non-genuine views of Paul, but again, I still think that the rationale still applies that Paul is describing Jesus as a human, and he uses an idiom that would signify humanity to anyone who's familiar with the Old Testament, and
Right,
that is born of a woman.
right. But
Yeah.
so,
I
I
mean, it sounds like there's two explanations that you're positing. One is, look, maybe this is just an explanatory gap. Maybe this is one of the areas where Carrier's work doesn't, his thesis doesn't translate as well. And that's okay. That's what Richard Miller said too. He said, basically, I agree with you that contradicts Carrier's work, but nothing can explain everything. And that was, Richard Miller's sort of disputation of that. He said, I get, he's like, I get it. What you're saying is there's no way to rationalize what Paul writes when he says born of a woman with Carrier's thesis. But he says, so what? Every theory has holes in it. So, and it sounds like the other way you're rationalizing it, which I'm still kind of curious about, is that Jesus was some sort of a hybrid entity, that he had some sort of celestial component and some sort of real component.
Well, yeah. I wish I had the knowledge up here. I'm trying to get all the knowledge and remember, but I have a vague remembrance that, yeah, that was still part. Him dying, he had to become human first. So, like, do you understand? Like, I, are you also maybe tangential? Are you familiar with Merkava mysticism?
No, no, Merkava mysticism.
Yeah, it's basically what I guess Paul was probably taught. It are you familiar with Kabbalah?
Yeah, yeah.
So Kabbalah is like a medieval version of Merkava mysticism, but Merkava mysticism was happening around the time of Paul. But when Paul talks about like, makes a really weird long thing about going up to the third heaven and different stuff. But anyway, there's different levels of heaven, and you can go up there, and that's kind of I imagine what Paul was also talking about, but also what the ascension of Isaiah was referencing, and the different like kind of levels of heaven. But all that is to say that there were like normal everyday events kind of that were happening in these upper levels of heaven, I guess. But anyway, uh,
Well, let me ask you this question then. If I'm looking at the physical Jesus while he's alive, would he appear to my eyes to be a human being in your conceptualization of this thing?
well, within Paul, I guess you know it doesn't.
Not within Paul. I just mean like what because I think we can all agree that Paul's interaction with Jesus on the road to Damascus or whatever was probably non-corporeal, right? So
Right.
I would agree with that perspective, yeah. But I guess I'm just saying like if I saw Jesus walking down the street, would he look human in your eyes?
Yeah, I have to go within the lens of whoever I'm talking about. It doesn't seem like Paul, and it seems within this context we're
Well,
talking
how
about
about
Paul.
this? Let me
He
specify
only
more.
believes no one sees within Paul. No one sees Jesus before he dies. The only time anyone has ever spoken about seeing or having a revelation, a vision of Jesus, and that's how it's described, only happens after the death. And so nobody my response is that nobody sees him beforehand, if that's what you're talking about. But it seems like you're asking, oh well, he's up here, how are people seeing him? But but yeah, so people aren't seeing him necessarily beforehand, and then afterwards, he's after his death and resurrection, he appears to Cephas and Paul and the 12. Yeah. So as well, I don't know how they, but they describe it as a revelation. They describe it as like being
well,
appeared.
let me be a little more precise. So, and we should move on to another
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
because I don't want to spend too much time on this. But let me be a little more precise. So we have a birth of Jesus, born of a woman, right? That Paul refers to, and then we have a death and a burial, right? And Paul uses specific language around funerary rites.
Hmm.
So, in that window of time between the birth of Jesus and the death of Jesus, is your contention that Jesus was human, or do you think it was like some sort of a hybrid existence?
Uh, I'm not sure. Well, yeah. I think he needs to be human. At least I think he needs to be human for it to be meaningful. I guess I think to Paul. Um, but
Oh, well then how is that compatible with mythicism? Because it seems to me like in Carrier's book, he says specifically this is the minimal historical perspective is that Jesus was flesh and blood. Like it seems to me if you're saying Jesus was indeed human, then we actually would agree with each other. It seems like because that's
Well,
all I'm arguing is Jesus was
he
a real
is
human.
he is human in a celestial. Uh, he was a human born in a celestial realm, killed in a celestial realm, and then, uh, yeah, showed up to the apostles.
Okay. Well, I guess then here's my problem. So again, you get back to the same issue then. If you're saying he existed purely in a celestial realm, then I don't think Paul would have used born of a woman, right? Because that's a very specific idiom that has a very specific meaning. So that's one thing. And then we could turn to talk about some other topics.
Okay, yeah,
And
but are you it?
But but here's the other problem that if you're saying that, well, in essentially in all senses, Jesus was, was real, was physical, was human, but it was like just on a different plane,
Yeah.
then here's the problem with that. Then that becomes a theory that essentially is non-falsifiable, right? Because and Carrier actually does address this a little
So
bit because he
I'm
understands.
not making fact claims. I'm making claims about you. You're correct, but I'm not making that claim. My claim is that Paul believes this.
But yeah, but then, I mean, but here's the problem with that claim is that, Paul then becomes, you know, essentially there's nothing that Paul could say that could change your mind about that claim, right? If you're saying for all intents and purposes, Jesus was human, right? And he lived a human life, but it was just, just parallel to our own reality, then that becomes a claim that's non-falsifiable. And Carrier's book has this problem too, because here's the real problem
How is
is
that
almost
non-falsifiable? He literally. I feel like Paul literally talks about Jesus only in a spiritual, visual, revelatory kind of way, and no, there's no like if even if I gave you this point, he was born of a woman, which I don't. This would be like one point that puts him like, you know what I'm saying? Like
sure,
what
sure, sure. Well, we can let's
where
move.
is the
Let's
rest of this stuff? Like you would, if all of the things
uh,
in the gospels would have happened, you would have expected way more than just of a woman, and it doesn't even seem like he knows the woman's name. I don't know. Go ahead.
Well, I think he's not. Again, I think he's not using the woman's name because he is using the idiom "born of a woman." But I mean, we can go into other things that Paul says,
Yeah.
and I want to get to the Jewish literature too, because you touched on that briefly in your response to my video, but it was I think you kind of glossed over that point a little bit. But let's. I
What
mean,
Jewish literature?
yeah, the Jewish literature, yeah. But another thing that Paul says is that Jesus was born under the law, and he calls that hyponomon. And so that is a phrase that also is an idiom that refers to the human condition. In the Old Testament, the phrase under the law refers to the Jewish people living under the law of Moses. And in fact, it made that phrase made its way to the Hellenistic literature. In fact, Philo of Alexandria uses under the law. The Stoics use that phraseology under the law. And the Stoics certainly believed in sort of a world that is determined by material suffering and ways to transcend that suffering. So, I mean, to me, that's again another phrase that Paul uses that is hard to reconcile with a celestial being.
Um, I don't think so. I don't. I honestly like this is one of the things I don't understand how to communicate. It just feels like we're talking past each other. Everything that can happen down here happens up there. So all
Okay,
the
but
events, and
if
so it, and he's coming to be, the Messiah for the Jewish people, and up there, I'm saying he's a human. He has born, I'm understanding he's born of a woman, and so he would make sense. He would be of the people, and that he was meant to save. Like he was one of them. Like um, yeah, I don't know. I don't.
all right, what about Paul's use of the word burial? And I want to specify because in the Koine Greek that Paul uses when he says burial, he's again saying that the body is interred. So he's actually referring to a body interment and funerary rites.
Um, what do you know where that is in Paul?
Yeah, it's in two places. It's in the pre-Pauline creed that he gives in, I think it's 1 Corinthians 15 verses 3 through 7, and then
Okay.
also Romans, I want to say 6:4.
So
And
what do you think my response is going to be?
um again, I think I mean, well, I don't know. I mean, to me, if you give a body funerary rites, that is something that it's hard to that Paul is using the word that means interment or entombment,
Right.
right? And it's specifically a rite associated process. So it seems to me that there's a body without life at that point.
Right. Yeah, because he died. He was killed by the powers and principalities. But like I said, and I keep saying, all the things that can happen down here happen up there.
Well, let's turn away from the writings of Paul
And
and let's get to the Jewish stuff.
okay, yeah,
Like,
but yeah, all the things, and there's lots of literature on this. All the things that happen up here happen up or down here, up there, as above, so below. But yeah, go.
including a dead body.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he. That's the. Yes.
But then isn't
Osiris
it?
died and rose in a celestial.
But isn't then your thesis again? I guess, and I don't want to. I don't want to circle back to this too many
But
times.
not even Osiris. Inanna too. Inanna went into the underworld, and are you familiar with that story at all?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
It
For sure. Yeah.
it purpose perfectly matches with the ascension of Zaya, except it's going the opposite direction. I guess it's no, it's the same way. He's coming down um, through the layers of heaven towards the earth, and she's going down through the earth, kind of to
Well, so
like the underworld. And each level is, they're basically taking off a piece of their clothing, and they're looking more like a. Uh, at, Jesus is as he's coming down looks more like a human as he goes to where nobody recognizes him, and she, takes off her garments and gets less powerful, and then is killed, crucified, and yeah.
but here's the problem with the comparison with Osiris. So Osiris has no corporeal body form. So in other words, for a deity like Osiris, that deity can't exist separate from its body. So essentially what happens to Osiris is he gets torn apart in pieces and then he becomes lord of the underworld. So he is reassembled in the underworld and he's still, I guess you could say, he still goes on living, but I feel like the comparison to Jesus is very different. Jesus was at least, if you believe in Christian theology, Jesus was, again, there's a lot of comparisons that Carey makes to this sort of idea of dying and rising gods. Most of the gods that he brings up are cyclical in nature. With Jesus, it does seem qualitatively different. Like you have a dead body, right? And then the other issue is, again, it seems to me that we're hitting that impasse of non-falsifiability, right? Because if you're saying yes, there was a dead body, but it was like in it, then there's literally nothing that I could find in the New Testament or Old Testament or any other set of writings that would be able to falsify what you're saying. So in other words, like let's say I saw Jesus, he literally sat down with me, he literally ate a sandwich in front of me, and I saw him go to the bathroom and he peed and I watched it all happen. And then he walked out the door. So I know that he was a real human being. Then, you could say, well, anything that can happen in this realm can happen in the other realm. So he was metaphorically eating a sandwich
But
with you. He's
nobody
symbolic.
saw any of those things. Paul describes nobody seeing any of the events that happened
No, no,
celestially.
that's actually not true. Paul does describe the last meal of Jesus, the Last Supper, and he describes Jesus as eating with people. So you see what I'm saying? There's even if
Yeah,
I had
that's an
any of that.
interesting. It's interesting that you said Last Supper because he says the Lord's Supper. That's one of the points of the book is that it's referred to as the Lord's Supper, not like yeah, the Last Supper was added in the Gospels to uh, to say that he had suppers before. Um, but yeah, so
So,
this is another thing
th-
that he doesn't need to be on Earth to do, and
but
this
the
is
just
God.
yeah, but but I think you see what I'm getting at here, right? There's literally nothing that I could say that you couldn't rationalize into like, well, this is symbolic or metaphorical, right? Do you see you're coming to a point of where your
But
model is
but
very non-falsifiable?
it's not non-falsifiable. This is it's what Paul says. It's he's explicit about having visions and be Jesus appearing. Um, but but yeah,
Well,
we
I
can.
agree. I agree with you. Paul's interactions with Jesus are non-corporeal in terms of like what he encounters from Jesus on the road to Damascus. But I'm
And that's how
recounting what
you he
Paul.
describes how you become an apostle is having a vision of Jesus.
Well, let's move on from the
Yeah, yeah.
writings of Paul because I feel like I've kind of made my point um, solidly enough. But um, okay, how about the Jewish writings that assign Jesus an illegitimate last name, the name Ben Stata and Ben Pantera?
So the Toledot Yeshu, right? Is that what it is?
It's in the
Or
Toledo Yeshu.
it's
It's
also
there's some references to Ben Pantera in the Talmud as well.
okay. So I I don't understand. I watched a bunch of your videos, and you talk about the Toledot Yeshu in like every video. You know, crucifixion, Toledot Yeshu. I don't know anything about it. You seem like an actual literal expert on it. My initial thing would be like I said in my video. Well, so my understanding is that uh, it has such a variety of truths about Jesus that it's clear to me whoever is writing those things either a has no access to the truth of the matter and is not trying to report the truth of the matter, or treating it like I think the original, or not original, but the people in the Gospels were treating it like a myth, or like it's something they could play with in order to um, besmirch, Christians. But it also seems really late. You can you know try to reconstruct something from oral legends, and you can say, but again, that feels like inventing evidence where you don't have it. You can say, oh, that, what I'm saying, oh well, we could see this being older, um, but even then, like, even if I gave you, like, it was made, if you showed me that it was made the year Jesus, and it was like um made at the same time, like, I would just be like, okay, well, these people are just, this is like a anti-polemic against Christians, like they're just ragging on, like, if you know what I'm saying, like, if I, I think it's the original, not the original, the first, I think, picture of Jesus, the one with the donkey head. Are you familiar with the little graffiti thing?
Alexamino Sgraffito, yeah, Alexamino Sgraffito, yeah.
So, like, I feel like that's just assuming, like, or if you take the same kind of idea towards that, it's like, oh, he was real, because this is just you know what I'm saying? Like, it feels just like this guy's just making fun of his friend who, or not, maybe it's not his friend, but his, that believes in Jesus. Like, it requires no
Well, I think the it's a little bit different because number one, to me, the Alexamenos Graffito was probably made by Greco-Roman critics of Christians. Probably that's probably the best scholarly perspective. We definitely know when that was, and we know it was quite a bit later. We know that it was making fun of Christians worshiping a human being, and that was one of the big criticisms. To
but
me,
so the parallel was that, should we believe that he was, Sorry, I don't even understand what my parallel was, but yeah, it
No, no, no.
just
I get your point. I get your point. It's reacting. It's trying to repudiate Jesus, right? So they don't really care what the truth is, right? That's kind of what you're saying.
well, and but this is also really common within the gods or whatever. Like if you're making someone fun of someone's god, you would do it within the context of that person's god. I feel like I know examples, but they're not coming out. But this is, you know what I'm saying? Like even in
Yeah,
like within today, like if you look on YouTube, you can if people that are going to be anti-Christian are going to make, maybe cartoons with Adam and Eve and a serpent and something or whatever, and but that doesn't mean they believed there was a garden with a serpent, talking serpent and stuff.
sure, sure. Yeah. Although, I mean, the analogy kind of does break down a little bit because when people make fun of people believing in Adam and Eve, the talking serpent, they're making fun of Christians for having that literal belief. So, I mean, but
I,
here's the
I'm
point I'm making.
I don't understand what you mean.
Well, I guess here's the overarching point that I'm making. Was the Toledot Yeshu a response to Christianity or was it a response to Jesus? I think there's a solid case to be made that it's a response to Jesus directly. The reason why we think that is because there's a lot of exculpatory language towards Paul that's used in that book. So, in other words, they say Paul is fine, Paul is a good guy. Paul was just misled by Jesus. There's actually some versions where Paul is secretly a double agent. But
That's what I'm
to me,
saying. That's what I'm saying. It's so wild the breadth of what they're doing, and this is why and it seems like for the same reason the gospels seem to just be making stuff up. They're playing with it. This is another thing that the book goes over is that
well, let's stick with let's just before we get too far off topic because I do want to make the point about I don't know of any other case where a celestial or mythical entity is assigned a sort of bastardized lineage, right? And that's the whole point of calling Jesus Yeshu ben Pantera or Yeshu ben Stata, right? So ben Pantera means that he was the son of this Roman soldier named Pantera. This to me is something that you could only say in a way that's convincing about somebody who's an actual person. In other words, I can't say, well, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know of any other anti-religious polemic that says, well, your God is actually the bastard son of like an individual human being, right? You see what I'm saying? So I think the argument is persuasive to me. In other words, if Jesus' existence was purely celestial, then no one would believe that he was the son of a Roman soldier, right? They would
but
say, "What?
so
This is an angelic being. How can that be?"
but I I would say that anti-polemic. I'm not sure if that's the right term, but that thing didn't come around until Christ was definitely euhemerized, I guess. So where he, I don't.
Well, okay,
There's
okay. So
clearly not a very long period of time uh, where he, even in my mind, was a celestial deity. With once you have the Gospels, Mark, I still think Mark could have potentially believed been a mythicist more or less, but it doesn't seem to be like actually trying to root it in history until like Matthew is a little bit more, but Luke is also Luke is the first time it's like no, this has really happened and I'm gonna be a historian and
well,
um,
how about this? Can
so
you see where at least if there is a Jewish anti-Jesus focused argument saying that he was not a legitimate child, that he was born illegitimately out of wedlock, fathered by a Roman soldier, can you see how that would at least in me exist like as a piece of evidence that points towards Jesus being physical, being human, living in our realm?
no, I don't. I I understand, but I don't get it. It's yeah. It seems like, um, yeah. I don't know.
Uh, okay, well, I guess my point is this: if if I have a friend named Bill and I'm trying to tell you that Bill is a jerk and I'm trying to say mean stuff about Bill, and I say, well, Bill, Bill's literally a bastard. His mother had sex with some other guy, right? This used to be a claim that people would make in antiquity about just a way to repudiate somebody's reputation. So to me, if you say that, that doesn't make what you would say if Bill was a purely angelic, purely celestial, or purely spiritual being. You would say, well, that doesn't make any sense to me because, you know, it's, he's not a real corporeal entity, right? And then I would be like, yeah, I guess he's not, so I can't make that argument. So the fact that this argument became persuasive enough, so persuasive, in fact, that it reached, Celsus and Roman critics within at least a few decades after, the original oral rabbinical anti-Jesus teaching.
You think where how do you where do you have that it within a few decades? Where does that come from? When I
Well,
see
let me. I don't want to speak out of turn. Let me see. When did Celsus? I have it in my notes here. But Celsus was the first Hellenistic or Greco-Roman critic. So he wrote this in around 175 to 180. He
so,
wrote he quoted Jesus as being Yeshu ben Pantera, or Jesus having illegitimate lineage.
so you
That was an
think
argument that
that's
Celsus made.
you would say that was in with a few decades?
I mean, it's in less than a century.
uh, uh yeah.
Well, I mean, so here's my point is,
But
to me, this argument doesn't.
clearly within the 70s or 80s and before this the second century he's he's the historization process is in full force. So the sect that won out was not the celestial mythicist version. It's clear
But
that
why would
not
but
only did it not the only one that existed, or yeah, they like it. The
okay,
things
but
were
here's the problem with that analysis is Celsus is not taking Jesus's patronym of Ben Pantera from the Christians, obviously, right? The Christians wouldn't have been talking about Jesus as Yeshu ben Pantera, right? Celsus would have had to have got received that information elsewhere.
I don't understand what. Yeah, so he would have gotten it
So
from
in other words,
Jews that were responding to the Christians of that time period, which is, you know, late second century,
okay, well, I mean,
right?
to me, yeah, to me at least, it's at the very least, it's hard to rationalize a celestial Jesus with a Jewish anti-Jesus polemic that suggests that he was an illegitimate child, right?
You,
And to me, this argument of his illegitimacy is actually the most common, the most preserved doctrine. It's in Matthew, it's in the Gospel of John. I think Paul sort of makes a subtle reference to the apparent illegitimate nature of Jesus in his own writings as well. So I mean, I think that this issue of Jesus's legitimacy or Jesus's patronym is 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 rather significant to me. In other words, this accusation would not have carried any weight if Jesus was a purely celestial being by anyone's definition.
so, um, if I
And as
could
I said,
show
the
you a bunch of this kind of rhetoric with other gods, and I don't have that right now. I feel like I've seen that. But if I could show you this was normal and gave examples, like would that sway you at all in this? Like if I could say, yeah, they they did this with I don't know, Osiris, or they did this with whoever, this amount of gods, and they that were euhemerized, the people besmirching
well,
the
here's
deities
here's
were putting them in their mythical context on Earth. Would this change anything for you?
yeah, here's the problem with that though is you know Heracles or Hercules, he was euhemerized over a period of about 1,000 years. Romulus was euhemerized over presumably at least about 7 centuries. Osiris was euhemerized over about 2 millennia. So I don't know of anyone who was euhemerized in such a rapid time frame. So the problem is if you let's say you say, well, let's look at Perseus, right? I think Perseus was like sort of a mixed blood person, right? Like I think Perseus had the son of a he was the son of a human woman and a Greek god, right? So I think that sort of puts that person in a different category. But when
I don't understand the rationale. Can you try to explain that? I don't, how are
yeah,
the
I think
speed at which someone is euhemerized puts them in a different category?
yeah, I mean I think it does. I mean I think it's an important qualitative difference. I mean, in other
How?
words,
Why?
Jesus. Well, first of all, because we're getting kind of off the topic of the patronym of Jesus, but Jesus is euhemerized in an extremely brief period. I don't know of any other deities that were euhemerized as quickly as Jesus.
Uh,
I mean, do you know of any? I mean, like as hey, like, so there's Alexander the Great, but he was probably a historical individual.
all right.
So we have older information. We have people who are sort of deified in their lifetimes. But if you're talking about true euhemerization, that's something that occurs over centuries to thousands of years. So it
Why?
seems
Why?
surprising
Why
to me.
would you? I don't understand. Why would you think that? I don't understand. Why does that require thousands of years?
I mean. I just think in the historical literature that we have about all the characters that we say were euhemerized, they're all beings who took thousands of years to be euhemerized. But again, we're getting kind of off the topic. I guess my point remains that it's hard for me to make the analysis that the Jews would say that Jesus was an illegitimate child if Jesus was a celestial being.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
and I've been asking you a lot of questions. Let's because I know we don't have that much time left, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I at least want to be open to your questions too. And oh,
Um.
and let me get just one factoid in,
Yeah.
just one more. Okay, in Carrier's book on the historicity of Jesus, what is the final percentage likelihood that Carrier gives of Jesus being divine, or being mythical versus historical? Like in other words, what is the likelihood that Carrier assigns for Jesus being historical?
Well, he gives two, I think. One a fortiori and one. I think it's 1 and 3 or half. I think I could be wrong on that, but I think. Um,
Okay, well, excellent. Okay, so what you're giving is the pretest probability the carrier puts into his calculus. Now, this is actually a common thing that Carrier says in his own lectures, and this is actually the conversation that I had with Richard Miller, which was very surprising to me. In the book on the historicity of Jesus, Carrier actually says that the odds of a historical Jesus are 1 in 12,000, so approximately, I think, 0.008%. Now, to me, if you're saying there's about a 50-50 chance, that's I don't know that I have really as strong an argument against that claim. So I
okay.
just want to
Do you
say that
where
like a lot.
where where does it say that? Like I've got the book in front of me. Like I've never heard this claim. I've never heard him say that. I
Okay,
didn't. I don't remember. Um,
yeah. So he it's on. I don't know the page number here. It's roughly at page 1091. Right, but I'll read the quote if that's okay. I can read the
on the
quote really quick.
historicity,
Yeah,
you got
on
me
the
different
historicity
books.
of
I only
Jesus.
got pages up to 700, or
Well, I'm looking at the PDF. I'm happy to read it off to you. I've got it right on my screen right now.
okay. So yeah, okay. I don't agree with that. That's not what he said publicly. I don't remember
I
reading
understand what you're
that.
saying. He does, yeah, Carrier in his lectures does give a range of different numbers. And my analysis was on the historicity of Jesus. So I think this is actually a very important point because, like I said, there were people who were putting in the comment section that I was totally way off, and they were like, They were like, obviously, there's a 1 in 3 chance of a historical Jesus, and not more than that. And I was like, well, great, but that's way off of what Carrier gives. And I can read what he's saying. Carrier says literally in two different places that the 1 in 3 chance is outrageously generous and absurd. So he says in at least two places that it's outrageous and absurd. And then he says, in other words, in my estimation, the odds Jesus existed are less than 1 in 12,000, which to a historian is, for all practical purposes, a probability of zero. For comparison, your lifetime probability of being struck by lightning is around 1 in 10,000. That Jesus existed is even less likely than that. Consequently, I'm reasonably certain there was no historical Jesus.
So what
So
was that within the conclusion? I'm trying to look what you're looking at.
it's in chapter 12.
Right. So the
So
conclusion.
here's my point is that
Well, that's you can make your
that's re-
point, but I need to be working. I'm trying to figure out where you're at. This
yeah,
thing.
I mean,
So
yeah, he this is the more judicious estimate that he gives. But he does say 1 in 3 is a chance that he says is totally absurd and outrageous. It's in the comment section of my video too.
okay, but
And
I'm
let's
trying to find it in the book.
and if you want to, let's. I mean, I know we're almost out of time, so I do want to kind of like give you some chances to ask any questions. So if you think I'm misquoting Carrier, feel free to like put that in the video because I understand that that's what a lot of people think. I will say this in your defense: when I have heard Carrier lecture on his book, he does give a lot of different numbers, and I think he knows that this figure that he gives in On the Historicity of Jesus of 0.008% probably doesn't fly with people. So I feel like he does sort of assuage his numbers when he
What?
gives lectures.
Yeah, I don't. I
He's a
I
little more
just
vague when he gives lectures, in my point.
yeah. Well, I'll address that maybe in another video or something because I don't have it right here and
Yeah, it is the judicantiori estimate, so the more judicious estimate. But in again, he's saying, in other words, in my estimation, the odds Jesus existed are less than 1 in 12,000. That's really what I have an issue with. If you're just saying, hey, look,
but
maybe it's a 50-50 chance, we should at least be skeptical, that's kind of a hard conclusion for me to argue against, to be honest. I think you're just calling for skepticism. I think that's not unreasonable.
okay. Well, I feel like that what he is. You know, the title of his book is "Why We Might Have Reason to Doubt." These are couched in super, you know,
Maybe
non-extreme
that's true, but
words.
if that's the case, then he at least should have worded his conclusion, which is kind of the culmination of all of his analysis, with at least a little bit more care. At the very least, when I read the book, I come away with the understanding that he has calculated a percentage, and that percentage is 0.008%. That's and that maybe I'm being a little confused, but at least the writing that he gives in the conclusion is quite you know but he definitely says, I conclude it's far less than 1 in 3, and he says that a couple of times, and he says a couple of times 1 in 3 is outrageous, 1 in 3 is absurd. So I mean, I do want to sort of you know acknowledge though that when he gives lectures, his 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 calculations are a little bit more vague, and he does sort of make his conclusions a little more broad, and that we should have skepticism, which I can't really disagree with that. And I've said several times that I think a hybrid model is more persuasive. So, but I've asked you a lot of questions, and I put you on the grill, and I really appreciate that, especially because I'm a guest on your channel. So I want you to be like bounce stuff off me. Like, feel free to be like,
So this conversation went in a totally different direction than I was expecting. So I don't know, the things that I was prepared to talk about were basically uh, why this is like a super non-hard science, and so looking for a consensus in this field where um, requires so much interpretation, even just within this the conversation. We're looking at the same like passages and like coming up with widely different interpretations. But also, what something Richard Carrier says is that uh, consensus holds zero argumentative weight if the people that make up the consensus are unaware of even the basic points of the strongest argument against it. So, and it seems like continually the people that kind of dismiss his work and mythicism in general are unaware. They make really big claims about how it's all dumb, but they are yeah, straw manning it. They're either unaware or they're intentionally straw manning it. And it seemed like, at least parts of your video were, whether it was intentionally or not, were misrepresentative of the actual stuff. And then so far we've talked about nothing that I think which was mostly like the Josephus and the Tacitus and stuff, which are not even like big things. I think the big the strongest arguments for mythicism are in the Bible, in Paul, in coherency of all the gospels when you try to make them all be real together. And it's Bart Ehrman is a super anti-mythicist, but it was literally a week ago I watched one of his newer videos, and he literally says the people who write the gospels are writing or acting like they're dealing with a myth, because they're not trying to write down what happened. They're tweaking it, and they're for their kind of communities and stuff like that. But so I feel like you're saying his there you made a lot of claims like how he doesn't cite a lot of sources and I just I feel like all of the pieces for mythicism that he uses for his conclusion are all for lack of, they're like, if not consensus, like a normal thing to believe regardless. And it just feels like the move from taking all the evidence and is like too much for people. So I don't know. I just rambled for a
No, I
bit.
mean no, those are all valid points. So here's the point I want to make, and I really want to hone in on this, because one of the key points that Kira makes early on in the book is that mythicism should not be treated as a fringe theory, right? But
Mm-hmm.
here's my problem. I'm a very devout academician. I believe in the academic method. I believe in scholarly research, and the reason why it's so important is because you're putting things out in the scholarly literature that have been vetted, that have been reviewed, and that you have no chance. There's no chance you're going to benefit from any of them. So to me, it's problematic for Carrie to have this kind of bifurcated stance of saying, I don't want to interact at all with the scholarly literature, and at the same time saying the scholarly literature is guilty for treating me as a fringe theorist. Right? You see, you can't really have it both ways. So that's kind of the point that I was making. And I stand by that point. I think it's a persuasive point. I would be more enthusiastic about supporting Carrier if he were contributing at the same time to the scholarly literature. To me,
I
it's
don't understand.
at
How is
least
he not contributing to the scholarly literature? Also, I am unable to. I was looking that up. He has more journals. I don't. You said he only has 3, and the last one was like in 2003. He definitely has more peer reviewed papers. I don't. Um, I don't know where that goes. Also, another thing that you said in your video, you said there are 0 sitting professors that are mythicists, and that's uh, wrong. He's got a
oh
blog. He has a blog with a
yeah, I
list
mean,
of them. If you just Google list of uh,
but see, I mean, here's I mean, I mean, I'll wait if you want to like pull one up, and because I'm curious to see if any of them are actually professors anywhere.
list, yeah, Hold on.
I mean, but here is at least from, and maybe he's published something recently. But when I say the scholarly literature, I mean, actual academic journals that are peer reviewed and indexed. So that's what I mean when I say the scholarly literature. So you can write a book and you can say, well, this book is sort of peer reviewed, but to me, you're still getting money off the book sales. You see, and that's the really the critical difference.
Yeah,
In other words, when
this
I
is
put out a paper, I don't get a kickback if somebody agrees or disagrees with the paper. And
excellent.
that in some ways I think makes it a little more intellectually pure and rigorous. But
Um,
if you find me like a professor who agrees with Carrier, who has a faculty appointment in a relevant department, I'll correct that on my video
well,
though.
it yeah, it's on his blog. I'm having trouble remembering what the specific thing is.
Well,
We
well,
don't have a lot of time left, but
no, no, no.
there's
Let's keep the conversation going. So feel free to email me and I'll be like, oh, this person says they're a professor, but they're not, or they're in a different field, or there may be something else, or maybe they're an emeritus professor.
but
I just,
also it I don't even like bringing it up because it's just it is I don't it's not even necessary. I don't even care about. I saw a lot of people saying, "Oh, this is fallacy." Where it's just it makes me unable to even communicate with you. Does that make sense? Like if I'm
it does.
saying
But
I think this because of this and this and this, and then you basically just attack someone over there, and I'm unable to do anything with that. That doesn't matter to me. Like I
I
think
absolutely
this
understand.
stuff
Yeah.
for these reasons, and
No, I understand. And let me give you just a little bit of context because I think it will help clarify that. So most of the conversations that I've had with carrier defenders are people in the lay public who believe that there is a 0% chance that Jesus was historical at all, right? So I've had many of those conversations. So I guess my point of bringing up the academic consensus, well, there's 2 points. Number one is um, if you are on the side that you are absolutely confident that there was no historical Jesus, I think at the very least you should just be circumspect. You should be like, why am I so far away from a consensus that is at least unanimous or nearly unanimous? I'm not saying you should abandon your theory or not or stop looking at evidence but I do think you should at least be a little more circumspect, maybe a little more humble, and say, okay, there's maybe I'll at least be skeptical. So that's one reason.
so
Um,
sorry.
go ahead. No, no,
So
no, no.
yeah, so there's just so much like that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, all the criteria are like that biblical scholars use to determine whether stuff is real or historical in the Bible is so crazy. This stuff wouldn't pass for regular history. Real historians outside of biblical history don't use the criteria. The criteria are made up. So the consensus is based on what I'm saying is the consensus is based on faulty logic. I guess that's also a point. And I'll ask. It didn't seem, or you didn't talk about it in your video at all. Did you read Proving History?
I did not read Proving History. I read On the Historicity of Jesus, and I
Okay.
read Jesus from Outer Space.
Okay. So Proving
Yeah,
History
it
is
was just
a lot of your questions were answered in Proving History. It is the first part. I made the mistake of buying on the Historicity first, and like right at the beginning, it says this is part two of a two-part thing. So I'm like, shit, I have to go buy the other book. But a lot of your qualms, I think, are or misunderstandings are answered not ad nauseum, but very well. The consensus is made up by people using faulty logic that is circular and meant to basically allow them to keep playing with their toys. Um, and
well, but I mean, here's my well, okay. So a few things. So the other point that I think I was going to get to is that Carrier uses a lot of densely evidentiary arguments in a pattern that is essentially pro-catalepsis. So what that means is he's like kind of laying down all these Byzantine. So in other words, he gives his thesis, he gives an idea, and then he gives all the reasons why people are going to argue against that idea, and then he refutes those reasons. So it becomes like there's a really kind of dense decision tree. And my point is that his analysis is sound if you only read his book, but it's really densely evidentiary, right? And so that's another reason why the consensus of scholars is very, very important. So, like for instance,
But
if we're
they're
talking
unable
about
to. They're all they're basing their spirituality off of it. Why the majority of them? Why would they ever look at this? They literally, some of them take like
well, now
not
that's a
oaths
very,
or testaments of faith that they would lose their jobs, and some of them have for
absolutely, absolutely,
entertaining any
and
of this stuff. How can any intellectual,
absolutely, no, no,
uh,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. But here's probably the most important point that I'm going to make is that that is true of a lot of biblical scholarship. Absolutely. No question about it. But if we kind of separate out academic and secular scholarship, right? There's, for instance, like Bart Ehrman says things that are very like stridently atheistic. A lot of biblical scholars are very, very atheistic, and they float a lot of theses which I think are very secular, very atheistically driven, like saying like, Jesus was a failed apocalyptic prophet, Jesus never said he was divine, he was just purely political. These are all things that have a lot of popular opinions behind them. So, but here's the really important point that I want to make is if I'm reading a book about Jesus by somebody who's a pastor, okay, I will definitely view their perspective more cautiously, okay? And I think that's totally legitimate. So if somebody says, "Hey, I'm at a biblical seminary and here's my expert opinion about Jesus," I'm going to be like, "Well, that's probably a little bit biased." Now, a lot of people do this though, right? And they just give you their opinion without qualifying what their perspectives and their biases are. Like for instance, I,
so
I like
I understand what you're saying. So you can trust someone like Bart Ehrman more than you take, or is that what you're saying? Like someone that doesn't have a
no,
skin in the
no,
game,
just
you can.
just the opposite. I'm actually saying just the opposite, that it is important for us to say this is my theological belief and therefore this is what my bias is. But at the same time, you can express an opinion. Anyone gets to have an opinion, but I think it's reasonable for people to say what their bias is. Now we come back to Carrier because here's where I think it becomes really very critically important. Carrier has said in no uncertain terms, I'm an atheist. My life's work is to advocate for atheism. That's my whole goal is to refute religion and to advocate for atheism. He said that over and over and over again, and he's made that point even before he started writing books about the historicity or mythicism of Jesus. Now, here's why that's important, because if I wade into any field, right, and I say this is what I believe, now I'm going to start writing books about that belief, then at that moment, personally, this is my very scrupulously, rigorously intellectual, rigorously academic perspective, you've stopped being a scholar at that point. You're a theologian. You're an advocate for a specific worldview,
So
right?
we
Let's say
can't.
like
So yeah. So we should not think of the.
no, no,
So
no. I'm not saying you can't have an opinion. I'm just saying you should acknowledge that opinion.
well,
But
and
to me,
that's why it's in the beginning of his book. But also, I think it's worth noting that this, if you want to bring people away from the faith, and this is something that he says a lot, and it's something that I've learned in my life, and talking with Christians, saying there isn't a historical Jesus is a non-starter. There is many bet, and this is something that Richard has spoken on. If it was his goal to deconvert people, this is not the avenue that he would do. It's not effective. People don't listen to him. You know, this is just a non-starter. If your goal was to take people out of the faith,
well, you should you
there
should
are better methods than yeah.
you should check out my video that I did recently with History Valley. Because we went into some depth about what Kerry's motivations are, and he knows a lot more about this field than I do. I do want to I kind of think we should try to wrap it up fairly soon-ish.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I have a lot of gratitude. You've been very gracious. I think you've made some really, really important points. I think your points about skepticism are very reasonable. I think a lot of your points about a lot of your points are, I'm gonna think about what you said. I'll even think probably about ordering and reading Proving History, because if you think that's where a lot of the gaps are, I know you quoted a lot from Proving History in your video response, and I also do want to recommend if people are just watching this video, please do make sure that you go back and you look at your video, which goes into this topic. And while they're at it, check out your other videos because you're a great musician and you're very talented, and you cover some people who I really respect musically.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was kind of hoping we'd have more time because I was insistent that if neither of us changed the other's mind, then we would have to resolve our differences with a guitar battle.
Yeah. Well,
And now I see that you're going to try and weasel out of the guitar battle.
no, no, it's on.
No,
No,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, no, no. No,
but
you're a great guitarist. No, no, I'm totally kidding about that.
but
Yeah.
I also appreciate coming on here. You know, your bigger channel. You're good at editing. You have a nice looking channel. You're well thought out, well researched. And I'll yeah I only talk about this stuff with people that disagree with me. I have like almost zero interest talking about this with anybody else. So I do appreciate you coming on here.
Well, and let's agree on something else too then, because I think this is maybe an equally important point, is that we have become too used to our comfort zone of our resonant echo chambers in which we live. And I definitely have more atheist commentators on my videos than people who are on the side of Christianity. So I find
Yeah.
that to be a very interesting perspective. But I really want to express admiration for the fact that you're willing to have like a conversation. And this has been really, really enjoyable for me. So if I didn't already say that enough, like this
Yeah.
has been
Same
a
here.
fun conversation, and you're a bright person, and I hope this is I'm happy to revisit this at some point in the future. So if you ever want to talk more about this stuff or have me on the channel again, or if you ever
Yeah.
want to weigh in on other videos that I make, I'd be over the moon.
Certainly,
And
yeah.
and
I've definitely, yeah, I've seen a bunch of your videos, and yeah, a lot of them are interesting. Yeah, I've definitely, yeah. I was like, man, I have different thoughts on all of them, but I wanted to keep this video concise on the historicity. Um, but yeah,
well, this has been enjoyable, so I'm happy to be on anytime you'd like me to be on, and
cool.
you can do with this video whatever you'd like. I feel like this was a nice conversation.
Well, yeah, I appreciate it. And I guess I'll talk to you later.
Okay, do you want to let's do a sign off for our own channels at the end of the video. You can be like my channel, and
Oh
I'll
yeah,
do the same
like
if
and
it's okay.
subscribe. I'm really bad at this. I appreciate you giving me your like put my link down below. I'm like, oh, I'm just a new guy. But yeah, subscribe, like, comment, tell me how bad I did, um, and subscribe over there, Dr. Tavo. Or yeah, you can go ahead and do your
Yeah,
plug.
my channel is just Tavo, Tavo, San Abri, Sanabri. And I've got some other stuff on my channel too, just like you've got some stuff on your channel, which is like musical stuff. I'm trying to get more of my like kind of fictional and fun literature on my channel. So I did one thing that's like a short film. So I hope people will check out the other content on my channel.
What's the short film
And
about?
again,
I saw you got some books too.
I've written a few books, yeah, and some of them are like novels and very fictional. But you should check out the short film. It's about my dad. He passed away
Oh, I'm sorry.
some years ago. It's okay. I mean, it's
Yeah.
making that short film was very healing. So I'd love it if you put a comment on that video just to let me know what you think about
Cool. I'll check it out. And you should too.
it. Great
Thanks.
job. You get better at that. Yeah, you're great. Okay, great to
All
chat
right.
with you. Thanks very much
All
for
right.
having me on.
No
All
problem.
right, bye
Never.
bye.